139EL 2811. Date shipped March 20th, 1939. Firestone tires. Is it blue and white? Blue and white is different than ivory. Remember that. 8.5-to-1 compression pistons, 750, 3-speed trans, 22th engine sprocket, special polished and tested motor from Department 21, the race department. Here's our net prices. They just crossed that over and brought that price over there. And crossed that price right over to there. Standard equipment group. Chrome exhaust pipe covers for $1. And that's that. And this is Harley Davidson's invoice notice of shipment to Frank. And this is our sales order to Frank, or from Frank to Harley for that particular bike, as you can see. And we have some letters here, quite a few. Let's see what they say. It's from Harley Davidson to Frank. Dear Frank, we acknowledge your order for 139EL, 8.5-to-1 pistons. Usually when fit these pistons, we also do some special work on the motor consisting of polishing the intake and exhaust passages, loosening up the bearings. The extra charge for this work is $10 net. Cost out something, they said. When a motor is given this extra attention, also receives a special road test. Should you want us to do this work, please drop us a line, as in phone call, immediately, or cable. Unless we hear from you to the contrary, the motor will go through with just 8.5-to-1 compression pistons. We should be able to ship this motor in a week to 10 days. Best regards. Thank you very much for this order. We are very truly, Mr. Kilbert. There's a bunch of notes here. The whole something. Best supply 1-inch Venturi and carburetor instead of 1 1/8. We have had to change all of them, I think, what it says. Some other notes here. I find no change in something, but a lot better range of performance. It's trying to change the Venturi to 1 inch, from 1 1/8, smaller. Interesting. This is a repair order. For Frank. This is 6/1/39. Inspect, estimate, report motor. Call JP or J Ryan when motor is open. I guess the guy hot rodded it too much. Here are some other letters. These are carbon copies. Harley Davidson. It says, gentlemen, this motor referred to in this letter, engine 39EL 2811, was purchased by us and delivered April 8th, 1939. This motor is an 8.5-to-1 job, special polish and tested from Department 21, carrying a 3-speed transmission with 22th engine sprocket. This motor is driven 2,107 miles. The owner reports that after driving this motor 75 to 80 miles an hour for 5 or 6 miles, it seemed to tie up, slow up, pre-ignite, or something. This went on from the 1,000-mile mark up until it finally blew. So yes, indeed, it blew up. We used number 4 spark plug in the front cylinder and number 3 in the rear. It cracked the porcelain on the inside of the plugs 3 times on the rear cylinder only. Changing to a colder plug did not rectify this porcelain breakage. On the day it blew up, I went out on a service call with a used rear cylinder and used rear piston, 8.5-to-1, and tore the motor down on the road and installed these parts. Upon tearing the motor down, tore it down on the road. Try and find a Harley dealer to do that today. On the road, installed these parts. Upon tearing the motor down, I found a hole burnt in the original 8.5-to-1 piston on the rear cylinder. By installing a different piston, different cylinder in the rear, I tried the motor out on the road and drove it up to 100 miles an hour on the speedometer with no noticeable miss. My test was about 2 miles round trip. I returned the motor to the owner after he drove about 5 or 6 miles at 65 to 75 miles an hour. 2 passengers, he got the same trouble again and could not drive over 65 miles an hour in 2 cylinders. And we started to follow us in and finally went off on one. We removed the rear spark plug and found it valved up aluminum for the top of the used piston that I had just put in. We left the rear plug out and tried to run about 5 miles on the front plug to get a rope. About that time the front rod let go, causing the rest of the damage. After we got the machine in the shop, we pulled it apart and took off the used cylinder and replaced the original one and supplied with both pistons. The one with a hole burnt clear through is the original. We also sent the coil for their inspection. So he doesn't even know what's going on. This owner formerly had used a 1937-74 Harley, which he drove as hard as he has driven this new machine. He drove 12,000 miles without any motor trouble. 3774 would be a big flathead. Those of you who don't know, it's not a overhead valve, which is what this letter's about. Even though he did this, we consider him a rather hard driver. He drives 200-mile trips over the weekend alone pretty fast. Another thing about this particular 61, after about 15 to 1,800 miles, it got to be unusually fast, about 8 or 10 miles faster per hour than any of our other special polished and tested motors. The owner would like to get this motor back as fast as it was before if it'll stay together that way. But if it won't, I would advise putting a shim under the cylinders and dropping it down a little. The cylinder changes oil every 500 miles and adds in between. The motor gets about 250 miles per quart, and you will notice we set the oil pump up about 1 turn more when we change the piston. Plenty of lubrication in my opinion. He also uses Amoco gas, high test exclusively. That was 110 octane follows. We would advise fitting this motor up free so it will stand fairly hard driving, and would appreciate any information that you can give us as to the original cause of the trouble. This customer has owned 9 new Harleys, and we will have to replace this motor gratis regardless of the cause and extent of damage. The factory feels that this motor was unduly abused and can assume no responsibility. I would appreciate a letter of instruction on how these motors should be driven. We have loaned this customer a used machine to ride, and naturally would appreciate getting his motor back as soon as possible. I also have to mention this 61 was ridden solo at all times and never seemed to get unduly hot even after a hard drive. That's interesting. Thanking you in advance for your cooperation. We don't have any follow-up letters from Harley, so we can only guess as to the cause. So, if it was running good and all of a sudden, boom, no piston, might have been piston failure. But it happened twice. You can get a run of bad pistons. So we don't know. Well, that's real interesting. Be sure to page down if you want to see the pictures of all this documentation. See you guys in the next video.